This is a precursor. This is just a glimpse of what is to come.
Tonight, we're staying on top of more controversy in Aurora. The ACLU of Colorado is now investigating what they're calling a raid by police and immigration officers at a troubled apartment complex. We first told you about this earlier in the show. This all stems from that terrifying home invasion and kidnapping at the edge of Lowry Apartments last month.
Police say 2 people were beaten and tortured by suspected members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. More than a dozen people were taken into custody after the incident, but the ACLU and other organizations are criticizing how police responded. The House Keys Action Network says some residents were held for hours and unable to leave. The group also believes some people were unlawfully detained and taken into ICE custody.
This is not something that would be happening in a white affluent neighborhood. This is something that specifically happened to a community that was majority undocumented migrants, that they just middle of the night raided entire buildings and held hostage families for the rest of the day.
Aurora's police chief is pushing back on those claims, saying in a statement, quote, Colorado law does not prohibit the Aurora Police Department from assisting federal officials in apprehending criminal offenders or those with federal warrants, both of which applied to the suspects involved in this crime.
We know there's a lot of growing fears among Colorado's immigrant community, especially with the threat of mass deportations looming this year. So now we want to go in depth on what you need to know if you believed you're being detained unlawfully. Joining me now is civil rights attorney Ed Hopkins. Ed, thank you so much for being here.
Micah, thank you for having me.
Well, first up, what should you do if you're facing unlawful detainment?
Well, you know, it can get a little tricky because you shouldn't be doing legal analysis while you're interacting with the police. So what I'm saying is you shouldn't try to figure out whether or not the actual interaction is unlawful in the moment. Instead, what you want to do is you want to do 3 things. You want to try to stay safe, you want to make sure you do not self-incriminate, and you don't want to break any laws during the interaction. So how do you stay safe? You want to follow all of the officer's instructions. Okay, officers usually will tell you to put your hands up so they can see your hands at all times. That makes them safer and makes you safer. In addition to that, if you are in the process of becoming a U.S. citizen and you are in the immigration system, if you have papers on you and there's an immigration agent with the officers and you are requested to provide those, you should provide them. In addition to that, the officer can ask you a couple of straightforward questions. Your name, where do you live? If you have an ID, produce that. They might ask you, what were you just doing that they just observed? But you can, and oftentimes you should, assert your right to be silent in these types of interactions after answering those simple questions.
Ed, what about non-citizens? Do they have any rights when it comes to this issue?
If you are in the United States, the Constitution protects you. So under the 14th Amendment, our Constitution is supposed to be upheld throughout all the states. So the 14th Amendment guarantees you equal protection under the law and due process. And then, of course, the 4th Amendment. That guarantees you that you will not be subjected to unreasonable searches and seizures. And that applies to citizens and non-citizens alike.
Any Colorado-specific laws pertaining to this that we should know about?
Yes, there's a couple. There's a statute that describes what the police officers are able to ask you if they suspect you of committing a crime, those 4 basic questions that I talked about earlier. There is also a statute out there that gives us some guidance as to what we can do if somebody involved in government operations deprives you of your civil rights. So we can actually hold them accountable. And there's a law in Colorado that makes it a little bit easier for us to do that. But finally, there is a law that limits what law enforcement can do when it comes to helping immigration officials at the federal level enforce immigration laws. Detainer requests that might be submitted to law enforcement agencies by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Those are not warrants. And it's important that everybody understand that. Warrants are signed by judges. Detainment requests are not. So if you are in a situation where you are curious as to whether or not a warrant is being used to detain you, to stop you or arrest you, simply ask to see if there is a warrant.
All right, civil rights attorney Ed Hopkins, thank you so much for that really important insight.
Thank you, Micah.